Hello, everyone. Do you hear us well? All right, then let's begin. Well, thank you for being with us today, and we will present to you this webinar on the decarbonization strategies for corporates, industrial companies, and also more generally for corporates. So let's enter and have a quick presentation of AC Energie first, and then we will present how we accompany and support companies who want to decarbonize themselves. So quite quickly, the organization today is 60 people working on financial services towards financing energy reduction actions and consulting services. The company has made a turnover of 19 million euros in 2025. And on the specifically consulting services, we work with different types of companies. We work with investors that want to invest in decarbonization actors, with corporates who fabricate or sell equipment towards decarbonization, and also ING consumers and processes who want to lower their energy bill or have electrification of their demand, and also sustainability services. For the main services that we offer today range from energy sourcing, PPA negotiation, energy supply discussions, proprietary method, energetical excellence and performance that we will present shortly thereafter, because we will see that it has an high impact on the support we're proposing. And we also accompany energy consumers and investors in the installation of energy equipment like batteries, for instance, or e-boilers or heat pumps. And as we will see later, we also, of course, work on transition plan, SBTi commitments, and so forth. So for today, we will first present the interest of speaking about decarbonization at the moment where it seems it's not the main interest anymore, and then we will present the specifics of our method. So for the first one, of course, we all remember the Paris Agreement, which sets a goal to a global warming effect of plus 1.5 degrees, of course. But today, maybe the main drivers to decarbonize might be to better insulate the company towards energy crisis, volatility, and price surges. So the two main levers we present are, of course, the savings of the operational expenditure, because it's going to be a very important part of the assignments to work towards energy efficiency, of course, in procurement. But we also think that it might be a good opportunity, especially if we talk about electrification of demand as a de-risking lever to lower the fossil fuel consumption, especially, of course, gas and the fuel. We also have also a wide range of investors who will still today, in the world of today, will have a look at the decarbonization strategy of companies, and we think, and we have seen our clients that are very aware that they need to work on these topics in order to be interesting as a target for investment. We will especially, of course, talk about SBTi, because we think it might offer a very good framework to address the decarbonization strategy and the sovereignty question towards energy supply for companies. And Alban, I give you the speech.
Yep. So as Sebastian just mentioned, there are multiple reasons today to have a decarbonization strategy, but to get the fruits of your labor and all the benefits associated with it, it's important to have a certified decarbonization trajectory. And the best certification, or the most internationally recognized one, is SBTi, so Science Based Target Initiative, which is an organization that certifies climate commitments made by companies. It's an ongoing process, meaning that it's continuously being improved. The first framework was created in 2021, V1.0, and today we're at V1.3.1. The big transformation is going to be V2.0, which is currently being discussed and should be operational by 2027. And if we take a small look at what changed in 2026, so V1.3.1, which was released in April 2026, it doesn't change much. It's a small evolution. The only thing is it makes the absolute contraction approach, so your short-term commitment to decarbonization, still attainable, which was becoming a problem since your commitments have to be made for 2030. It was becoming too ambitious for new players that wanted to certify their trajectory. So that's the big change of V1.3.1. Whereas V2.0 is going to be a much more in-depth transformation of the SBTi methodology. Basically, V1.0 was mainly looking at the targets that were set. Are they ambitious enough? If yes, your trajectory is certified. Whereas today, it's going to monitor the actual delivery of decarbonization, meaning that progress will be monitored and the operational development of your transition plan is going to be closely monitored by SBTi, and it's probably going to be more difficult to keep your certification, or at least it's going to have to there's going to have to be real progress besides commitments. Additionally, the big expected transformations are going to be on scope 3, which will probably be more granular. Today's scope 3 as a whole is, of course, many different categories, and there's going to be a bigger focus, especially on the value chain action part. And finally, another big evolution is going to be on the GHG inventories. Today, there's no strong, I guess, expectations on the GHG inventory. You can make them yourself. You can make them with any external consultant, whereas in the future, a certification by a third party, a recognized third party, is going to be essential to get your SBTi certification. Which is why, as I see Energie, we suggest moving quickly, because V1.3.1 is probably less complicated to obtain in terms of certification, whereas V2.0 is definitely going to be more difficult. By how much is still a question, but moving quick is definitely a good idea. And just to go over the rules very quickly, so SBTi has two types of targets that can be set. The first one is a short-term target, so in the next 10 years. The other one is a long-term net zero target, so by 2050. Usually, most of the focus is on the short term, because that's where SBTi is going to make sure you actually have identified levers, etc., to achieve this decarbonization. It's split in two categories, so scopes 1 and 2 first. And the rules are quite clear. You need a very important coverage of your scopes 1 and 2 emissions, so 95%. You need to set a target between 5 and 10 years from now. You need to be aligned with the 1.5 Paris Agreement climate trajectory. So you need to achieve an absolute reduction of your CO2 emissions of 42% over 10 years. So at least cutting down your emissions by a linear reduction factor of 4.2% every year. Whereas if we look at scope 3, first, it's a little bit less ambitious, because of course your scope 3 is the scope 1 and 2 of your either suppliers or your clients. But it only needs to be included in your SBTi trajectory if it represents more than 40% of your global GHG footprint, which is the case for most companies. You only need to include 67% of your scope 3 emissions in your trajectory. So this enables you to only focus on the big categories of emission. And the CO2 trajectory itself is a little bit less ambitious, because it's a well below 2-degree ambition, which means that instead of a 42% reduction over 10 years, you're aiming at a 25% absolute reduction over 10 years. Or if it's more favorable, you can set an intensity reduction target, meaning that you reduce your CO2 emissions by euro of turnover or by ton of production. And for the long-term goals, basically you have to be on track for net zero. So you're looking at a 90% at least absolute reduction on both scopes.
So we will now enter and present the whole method and the specifics of the support we propose. The main differentiation is that we are very operational in our support and assignments, meaning that if, for instance, the companies have industrial sites or have production sites or tertiary, we will conduct analysis at the site level in order to derive what efforts might be made to the corporate level. We will, of course, as the proprietary method NRX allows us to do, we will see what levers we might activate per site, and we will then have a broader and more general conclusion that we can have a look on scope 1 and 2 and 3, of course. So that's what you see when we conduct pilot site level diagnosis. The second will be a cartography and a synthesis of all the levers. We will, of course, have a look at the efforts that has to be made on cost, mainly investment and operational expenditures. We will assess, of course, the feasibility of the action and also quantify the potential. We will then derive from the scope 2 priority design for all the actions, and we will then be able to level what actions are to be made first in terms of scope 1 and 2 and scope 3. That will allow us to project a trajectory for the company towards the short term, but also to maybe later term, like maybe 2050, if we're able to go this far. And then, of course, we will also propose a few more solutions in order to implement and operationally pilot the trajectory and give the company the tool, as well as negotiate maybe with the stakeholders in order to deliver the decarbonization roadmap. And now I will let Alban present the scope 1 and 2 analysis.
Yep. So to take a closer look at what we specifically do on regarding scopes 1 and 2, scope 1 and 2 emissions are abated through 3 main categories of levers, which are going to have varying levels of maturity, cost, and impact depending on the type of company we are looking at. So the relative size of your scope 2 or of your scope 3, your location for your scope 2 as well. If you are located in France, you're going to have low emissions associated with your electricity. If you're located in Poland or in India, you're going to have very high emissions associated with your electricity. So of course, the degree of focus depends on each company's specific scope 1 and 2 emissions. But these 3 lever categories are procurement or energy supply. Basically, can you make your your electricity low carbon? There are 3 ways to do this. Either you produce the electricity yourself with on-site PV or on-site windmills, or you purchase green electricity through a power purchase agreement, or you purchase green certificates which certify that your electricity is produced by renewable energy sources. For gas supply, there's a similar choice. You can have a biogas purchase agreement. You can replace your natural gas by hydrogen, and you can also use green certificates that certify that biomethane is what you're burning in your oven. From an energy efficiency standpoint, of course, there is a lot of process optimizations that can be made to reduce your energy consumption. An example is upgrading to better equipment. For example, a modern boiler is going to have a better efficiency than an old boiler. You can also recycle heat through heat exchangers or things like that. So there are often lots of small projects, small improvements, which can sum up to a quite consequent amount of decarbonization. And then, of course, big energy transformations that leads to an energy mix change. So if you can replace a high scope 1 fuel like coal or petrol or natural gas with something green like electricity or hydrogen, you're going to reduce a large amount of GHG emission, probably at the cost of a higher CAPEX and perhaps less technological maturity. But these are the grand categories that we look into to find decarbonization levers. And the reason AC Energie is good at identifying scope 1 and 2 levers is because it's really part of our DNA. One of the key products that Energie sells to its customers is energy diagnostics for industrial plants. And we have a toolbox that enables us to find a lot of good ideas, usually with the goal of saving money rather than saving CO2. So saving CO2 is rather a byproduct of our energy efficiency approach, but we can build upon this experience to make decarbonization the focus. And the way we do this is, as Sébastien mentioned, we conduct our methodology on a pilot plant or pilot site of the client, and then we extrapolate from all the ideas we get in this pilot site what levers can be activated throughout the corporation in all its plants. The end result is an abatement cost curve. So the idea is that for each product, we know, for each lever, sorry, we know what we want to do, what the CAPEX is, what the OPEX impact is, and so we can find the energy savings or energy additional costs associated with the lever, which gives us, are we earning money by abating this ton of CO2, which is the left side of the graph, or is it an additional cost to save this CO2, which is the right side of the graph? And by ranking all the levers across the corporation in an abatement cost curve, we can decide on which ones we want to use to reach the decarbonization target that we've set. So in this example, the logical thing to do is to activate all the levers that are on the left, especially the negative ones, because we're earning money to decarbonize. But each corporation is going to have their own way of building a climate trajectory. If you look at the next slide, if a company is deep in debt, if there's been a large investment that was made recently and there's less cash available, maybe instead of activating the most economically interesting levers, we're going to choose to activate the levers that require the least CAPEX. So each, with the same abatement curve, two companies can build completely somewhat different CO2 reduction trajectories, and we provide them with all the tools to make these choices.
Thank you, Alban, for this deep dive on scope 1 and 2. We are going to have the same approach on scope 3. Just as a small introduction, scope 3 is one of the main concerns of the different companies, clients we've met so far, since it is one of the, it's very often the biggest scope of the GHG footprint, and very diverse things. There are many parameters that could influence the scope 3 emissions. So as Sébastien and Alban mentioned earlier, on scope 3, the idea would be to focus on the main categories, the main subcategories that composes the scope 3, since you only have to focus on 2/3 of your scope 3. And from what we observed with our industrial clients, but also as other clients, the subcategory scope 3.1 is the biggest one, is often the biggest one. It's called purchase goods and services. And that's why we decided to deep dive into the subcategory to identify three main levers, such as Alban has done on scope 1 and 2. So the first type of lever we could identify here is what we call material efficiency. Basically producing the same product or with the similar characteristics, but using less raw materials. That could be through lower densities, through new design, or through the reutilization of production scraps, for example. So it might imply to reshape a bit the production lines. So it can come with CAPEX and with research and development spending as well. But the main advantage of this lever, and it is very rare when we look at the scope 3 level, is that it able to reduce both the spendings and the GHG emissions, because you reduce the amount of raw materials used into the production. So that's what the first lever. The second lever is what we call circular economy and bio-based material. So it's basically substituting the integrity or a part of the carbon-intensive raw materials that you use in production, replacing it by either low carbon ones or bio-based one. So again, you might have to use you might depend on your research and development department, since you have to find the right formula that substitutes your current raw material. And volumes may be limited, since the value chain doesn't necessarily completely mature yet. But what is very interesting with this lever is that you can go progressively with this lever. You can integrate more and more progressively the low carbon material inside your process, and so follow your decarbonization pathway, and include more and more low carbon material. And what could be the third main lever is what we call the suppliers engagement, a huge one. It's basically the fact that your suppliers are decarbonizing their scope 1 and 2. And if they do so, it means that your scope 3 will also decrease thanks to that. So the good news is that part of the reduction of your scope 3 can come with very limited efforts if your suppliers have set some very, let's say, ambitious decarbonization pathways or decarbonization strategies. But the drawback of this lever is that, of course, there's a more limited control over these scope 3 emissions. It requires often some purchasing leverage to influence your suppliers to decarbonize, and of course, with green offerings often comes higher costs that have to be considered in the trajectory of our clients. So that's what the main focus. So here we focused on the subcategory 3.1, which is one of the biggest categories of the events we've made so far. Of course, depending of your scope 3 shape, you might have some other categories that are also, as well or that could be as important as the 3.1. So of course we can tailor the approach depending on your scope 3. Here we just decided to show a small focus on two other subcategories that could be the subcategories 3.4 or 3.5. So looking at the upstream transport and distribution, for example, what we could do is to try to understand how your internal logistic practices look like, looking at what are your plant locations or your offices locations with your suppliers locations as well. Look at what are the transport modes utilized between these two locations, and benchmark then what could be the logistic providers that you can use after that. So identify and shortlist lower carbon options if they exist. And of course, with that, conduct an economic analysis to estimate what would be the incremental cost of a new greener logistic solution. Of course, we can do another deep dive in another subcategory, for example, in step 3.5 that deals with the waste generation. One thing that we could do is to prioritize the research and development options of the company. Try to estimate for every lever where we identify that we could improve the product recyclability, what would be the downstream impact of changing the product to make it more recyclable? Is it worth it investigating this lever or not? And as well, one idea that could be investigated as well on this scope would be the fact that you can either develop or acquire some businesses related to either recycling or giving a second life to the product you're producing. So, for example, if you are producing rubber, what will happen with the rubber you're producing? Is it maybe it's possible to acquire some company that recycle this rubber in order to have it into your scope and reduce your scope 3 emissions like that. So of course we can do many deep dives on many subcategories on scope 3 depending on your scope, of what your scope 3 looks like. we can then put all these levers with the volumes of tons of CO2 you can abate with the costs associated in this abatement curve. So this is the same principle as what Albert mentioned on scope 1 and 2. So what's very interesting here to look at is that there are very few levers in this example where the scope 3, there are few levers in scope 3 where the abatement cost is negative, so where you earn money to activate these levers. It could be the case for the material efficiency lever, for example, because you are using less raw material. But for the others levers, it's quite rare. So the idea is to prioritize which ones are the cheaper compared to the other, and try to have some backup levers in case you do not succeed to reach all the volumes you have planned in your strategy, or if your company is growing faster than expected, to have some backup levers that you can activate, even if they are more expensive, but that permits you to reach your decarbonization goal. So once this is set on scope 1 and 2 and scope 3, once the levers have been identified and prioritized through these abatement cost curves, the real goal of Energie and the thing we want to deliver to every client is first a well-defined decarbonization pathway with backup levers, as I said. But what is more important is to have some visibility on the associated costs that could be costs per year or per product, so that the client, the company knows if it's a cost that is acceptable or not, if it's possible to absorb it through its margin optimization, or if it has to put a premium on its products, so that people pay a little bit more to have some greener products. So just what we see on this slide is on the left, the strategies we can build with the clients on scope 1 and 2 and scope 3, with different strategies. Either you're going very quickly on the scope 1 and 2 because you are doing some energy savings, and so it's more interesting to activate these levers very quickly. While on scope 3, since the levers are often comes with extra spendings, you can do it more progressively to reach the near-term goals. So yeah, basically what we see on the right here is the extra spendings associated. So at the top, you can see the extra spendings per year. So is it acceptable or not to have a +10, +20% of spendings to have some green material into your production? And you can also have this vision looking at very specific product. It could be very unequal depending on what you produce. So in the example we've plotted here, for example, product 2 and product 3, there is a huge growth into the cost of production of this product. So it might be very difficult for the company to simply absorb it through margin optimization. It might come with a premium on the product, while maybe on product 1 and 4, it could be something that could be absorbed by the company. And I'm letting Albert conclude.
Thank you, Alexandre. So a quick word about implementation, which is where the real work starts in a way. Once we've sat together with decision makers to build our trajectory, which is what Alexandre was showing us just before, there's how do we make this trajectory happen? And the way we do that is from a global roadmap, move down in terms of granularity to each plant, each site, each stakeholder that has to do something, and really plan out the decarbonization. So for each plant, we're going to look at when we want to activate each lever and when we expect GHG emission reduction to be delivered. And that's how we create KPIs that are not only global, of course, with global KPIs, but also fine granularity KPIs to make sure everyone is on track and everyone is on board. Having everyone on board, of course, is also a big part of the work. So it's making sure all the local teams understand what's happening, understand why we're doing this, and understand that it's not only an obligation for them, it's also an opportunity to optimize costs, to reduce exposition to fossil fuel prices, etc. And the way all this is monitored live is usually through an Excel model where we have the goal or the target trajectory, and we can compare or monitor on a year-by-year basis where we are in comparison to what we expected. Finally, a quick word on supplier engagement. It's often a very important lever for Scope 3, and making it happen is definitely an additional work, which is also something we participate in. So it's ensuring that negotiation with suppliers start, are beginning, and then are moving forward, of course. So that's, yeah, another big aspect of what we do when we are implementing the roadmap that we designed with our clients.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Alban and Alexandre, for the presentation. We will quickly take a few questions and answer live. So the first one is, I struggle to see how supplier engagement can be considered an actionable lever since it's outside our direct control. How exactly can it be actionable? So as we've seen, it's oftentimes that your Scope 3 upstream will also be Scope 1 and 2 of the supplier. So we have also the capacity to work with supplier as well and decline the methodology we propose. It will, of course, depend on the market power of the central company to be able to convince or to cooperate or make cooperate the supplier, of course. So that can be maybe the second step that will not be the beginning of the method, but that's, of course, something we can also propose in terms, and when we can also offer is our industrial experience, of course, which can also be a selling point towards maybe engaging the supplier to cooperate with our clients to reduce their own Scope 1 and 2. So that was the first question. The second one, does any methodology mainly identify low cost and low impact quick wins, or you also recommend more transformative project with significant impact? So I say we do both. We have we make a cartography of all the levers, depending also on their return on investment and their time of return on investment. Of course, we might, of course, recommend to put in place, of course, less costly and the most immediate and feasible levers. But in turns, we will also propose, for instance, as we said, levers to electrify the demand, maybe to implement biomass, also consumption in boilers. So we might also propose this type of action, which might have a return on investment that may be several years and potentially strictly superior to 3, which is like a market standard. But we do well propose both, and the company and then with the teams choose to activate the most priority and the most easy to implement. Maybe Alban, Alexandre, I can let you take the question on project duration.
Yep. So what is AC Energy's typical project duration, and how does the approach evolve when a decarbonization pathway has already been defined, but not all levers have yet been identified? All right, so pretty large question. The answer is it depends. No, of course, that sounds a little bit easy, but it's very company specific. First of all, the size of the company, the diversity in terms of products, productions, production locations, etc., is of course going to have an impact. But a typical duration in terms of range is from, let's say, 1 or 2 months to 6 months for our largest projects. And of course, it's going to be impacted by if some of the work has already been done. For example, is there already a GHG inventory, or does that have to be made and included in the work we do? Has there already been some reflection in terms of what is the target we want to set? What is the certification we want to obtain, etc.? But yeah, typical duration is going to be from 2 months to 6 months, I say.
Thank you, Alban. Might we have other questions?
I think there are no more questions. Does anyone have anything else to ask?
Okay. Well, thank you everyone to see and follow our presentation on the decarbonization roadmap and SBTI requirements, and we will soon be in touch. And thank you for following this presentation. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Have a nice day.